Hi, and welcome to the podcast for Metaphor. This is to give you a little more insight into how metaphors function, which we will be exploring in class. Remember, metaphor is Greek for carrying from one place to another. So, metaphor truly just means that you're taking meaning from one word, carrying it, and placing it in context with another word. We will be using a selection of poems, Ezra Pound's In a Station of the Metro, T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and Wallace Stevens' The Emperor of Ice Cream to complete our exercise today. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which one thing is described in terms of another. A comparison is usually implicit. In a simile, it is explicit. Remember, a simile uses the word like. It is still a metaphor or a figurative language, but it is a like moment. From In a Station of the Metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd petals on a wet black bough. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what are the things in this passage? Faces, apparition, petals, bows, or boughs. And what are the things comparing? Well, the apparition could be compared to petals. The apparition of the faces could be petals on a wet black bough. Well, let's think a little bit. And these are just some images to get you thinking about these things and comparing the faces and the petals, the blackness and the apparition. You know, this tone, this mood that is being conveyed. We will continue to go through this poem as we go through the various four views of metaphor: the similarity view, the interaction view, the pragmatic, and the cognitive. The similarity view. In a metaphor, a word or expression that in literal usage denotes one kind of thing implicitly is applied to a distinctly different kind of thing without loss of meaning. The figure involves an implicit comparison between two dissimilar things. Once again, back to Pound. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Is there an implicit comparison between the two, faces and petals? Can this metaphor be translated into a statement? What is that statement? Are the faces like petals? Are the faces the petals? Faces like petals are faces and petals are various things that denigrate or change within time. So the faces of the crowd are like petals that are in a wet black bough. Does the statement suffer any loss of meaning when returning back to the images or things used? And does this metaphor enhance or create a vividness to Pound's language? Is it much better that he uses these phrases and this metaphor than just saying people like flowers will fade, or people like flowers are lost in a crowd? So this notion of vividness is very key to metaphors. And once again, just some images to help you kind of get some thinking and move through these processes. One of the best ways to understand metaphors is to go and look at images and to engage those images as a way to create a visual understanding of the metaphor. Now, in the interaction view, this means that in a metaphor, two disparate elements are brought together. The metaphoric word operates as a vehicle, and the context or subject to which the metaphoric word is applied is the tenor. The tenor is a subject to which attributes are ascribed, and the vehicle is a subject whose attributes are borrowed. Remember, you rent cars, you rent vehicles, so you borrow these vehicles. So vehicles is where you're taking the meaning from. Now we're going to look at a selection from T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. What is or are the vehicles in this line? What is being borrowed? I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. And what is the tenor? Well, if we ask ourselves, where's the meaning being borrowed? Coffee spoons, because that is what's being used to measure out the life. So the life is the tenor. Coffee spoons are small and tiny. So this individual has measured out his or her life with a very small measurement. Is there agreement? Do we measure life out with coffee spoons? Not usually when we think about the way that we measure life in years or months or even days or hours. But does this lack of agreement or this odd agreement affect the meaning? What is the meaning? Could this meaning be duplicated by literal assertions or similarities between the two elements? And this is where we're going to get into some fun, in that This juxtaposition of life and coffee spoons is bizarre in a weird way, but at the same time it makes sense to us. It definitely correlates the measurement of small elements, of small moments in relation to your life. And this does, of course, lead us into the next and the third way of viewing metaphors, the pragmatic view. And for this is when a metaphor meaning is similar to the literal meaning. A metaphor is the use of a literal statement in such a way as to suggest or intimate or lead one to notice what one might overlook. And in this case, we are again going to the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and we're looking at the line, "But as if a magic lantern through the nerves in patterns on a screen." So here we have an image of a lantern and a screen and nerves and a pattern. We get this sense of movement, this sense of a literal statement. The magic lantern through the nerves in patterns on a screen. Okay, the literal statement is there was this presence, kind of magical, that cast the nerves of this individual in patterns on a screen so that you could almost see what this individual is thinking. What does the use of these words express? Well, it gives you a sense of the magic, the ephemeral, but also of the concrete, the nerves, the patterns, the sequences of one's life, this notion that you could pictorially represent this visually to an individual by projecting it onto a screen. And these words used, lantern, nerves, patterns, screen, do they contribute to creating a meaning for the reader? Do we get a sense of life being cast upon as a work of art for one to look at? And is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? How do these words connote this image, this statement? And the last is the cognitive view. Cognitive science and cognitive theories are abounding in literary study and in other studies because they're looking at the way we make sense of the world, the way we construct our life and the various stories that we tell in our mind. Now, for this view, all language exists as a metaphor. Metaphors completely surround us at all time. Life is a journey, war is a game. And in this way, they allow us to project understanding of life for others. In this view, the vehicle from the previous view of metaphor becomes what is called a source domain. It's what we draw our source from. It's still the word used, and the tenor becomes what we call the target domain. The target domain, like the tenor, is the context or subject to which the word refers to in the phrase. Instead of looking at the interaction occurring between the two, a transaction occurs which realters or reorganizes the way we perceive or think about that target domain. For instance, if in the phrase life is a journey, life is the source domain, we're pulling information, we're borrowing the attributes. Journey is the target domain. This is where we're altering, we're referring to this. The transaction between the two allows us to reorganize our understanding of a journey. For this section, we are looking at Wallace Stevens, The Emperor of Ice Cream. And in this we have, take from the dresser of deal, lacking the 3 glass knobs, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once and spread is so as to cover her face. Let's look at some images. There's a dresser, there's some glass knobs, there's a face, and there's some embroidered sheets. So, okay, we've got these images in our mind. So now let's think, what is the source domain? Now remember, the source domain is the vehicle. What are we borrowing meaning from? And what are we projecting meaning on? So, okay, we can look right here. Dresser of deal. Let's just focus on that. Dresser of deal. So we're borrowing, deal is what we're borrowing. It's our source domain, and it's being applied onto the target of dresser. So deal, what does deal mean? Well, you deal cards, you deal various, deal in various goods and services if you're a merchant. So it's a transaction, right? It's a movement. It's a game of sorts. And dresser is where things are contained. So the dresser is the containment of these various games, these various experiences that we use. So is life, is this experience of containing these various games we play, these various transactions we make, contained like a dresser? Should we take from this life, this experience of changing and of making bets and of placing deals or of shifting cards, the idea of life? Does this transaction between the two allow for a different understanding than just literally taking something from the dresser? And what does this different understanding mean when we think about the fact that the woman is dead, that her face is dumb, that not that she's not smart, but that it is not moving, it is not able of projecting. So has she played the last game? Is she being covered by her games? What's going on? Now remember, the four views of metaphor are similarity, and this is comparing two things, interaction, the interaction between the vehicle and the tenor, the pragmatic, metaphors as literal statements, which allow us to see something we might overlook, or cognitive, that they function as structures of thought. Before you come into class, I want you to spend a couple minutes organizing your notes about metaphor and ideas. Review and reflect on this understanding, and then write a quick personal definition of what metaphor is and how a metaphor functions. You should give one example from one of the works that we haven't went through to support your definition of metaphor. If you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.